Hey everybody on here. I just wanted to do another quick video. Well, I'll try to make it quick on the Ukraine-Russia issue. And I really want to bring about an aspect of taking a look that this is, in my opinion, probably the biggest false flag that we have ever seen, ever going on. What is happening with the media. And I say this because even people who normally are on top of the narratives and the agendas, people like Dan Bongino and these big names and things like that that are out there, even them, I'm seeing buy into this whole war narrative piece that's going on. And it's very interesting to me when I start to look at these things and I start to connect the dots and I start to take a look. In this video, what I want to do is really encourage you to go back, because in the codes, one of the things we have coming up at the end of March, but some of these pieces are already in motion, is this aspect of so much disorientation, so much things not being the way that they appear to be right now going on. And so it's not just a straight out lie or manipulation, but distortions, showing one thing and having things be another way, trying to present one reality, but the reality being another way. And so what we're seeing here, and so many people are jumping on these different bandwagons, they are using Putin as a division force, for one thing. Well, first of all, let's say, and I'm sorry, my nose is itching today. Putin really has a thing. He had a great ability to just shut down COVID, because once Putin started some stuff up, and he's still not the initiator. I'm still not going to say that he is the initiator in this situation. If you don't understand why I'm saying that, you want to go back and watch my other video on the Ukraine-Russian war and what I put out on that just a couple of weeks ago. But he is on one hand being proactive, on another hand he's very defensive and being on the defense and not the action. He's not the one that started this. This is an ongoing thing that's been going on for a long time, and we need to get into these aspects that we already know. Go back into some of the posts, some of the tidbits, some of the lines, some of the things that have been put out over the last few years, and understand what's really going on here. It's so easy to jump on somebody like Putin because, yes, he's got a past of being with the KGB. Now, again, I'm not dividing here. I'm not I'm not necessarily taking sides. I'm just calling things the way I see them, and I'm just calling them out for what I'm seeing in them. So you're welcome to have a different opinion. That's okay. But automatically, this corruption in our world, these corrupt players are trying to scapegoat things onto somebody. Now, again, in my past video, I talked about how Putin's standing his ground. He's standing up to these corruption people in the world. You can see these different players taking different positions. But I want you to stop and look at how they're positioning Putin. They're positioning him the same way that they position Trump. They don't have Trump to make evil right now, but they have Putin to make evil right now. And that doesn't mean that Putin has always been on the good side of things or always been the great guy. But we have to look at things the way they are now, because any of us, if we look back to how we were 20 or 30 years ago, I know I'm not the same that I was 20 or 30 years ago. My human self has components that are the same, but not the same by any means. And there's so many things where the media is trying to portray an image the same way they did with Trump. This narrative plays over and over again, just in different scenarios. We're actually seeing a lot of repeat of what they did with COVID happening in this Russia-Ukraine war right now. And that is important to keep in mind. And you've got to take a look and say, okay, regardless of what you think about Putin, look at who is going up against him. Look at who is discrediting him. It's the news sources. Now, we do have some people in the US that are standing up and calling out the truth. Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of those. course, there's a lot of people that want to say, oh, she's just an extremist, she's just that, but she's calling the truth out, and she's calling it out the way it is in a lot of ways. So it does warrant listening to this. And when you're looking for the truth in something, you've got to be willing to look at a multiple of perspectives in things. Otherwise, you're never going to get to the truth. And if you're only looking at what the media is showing you, you're not going to get to the truth. So I've been kind of looking into this a little bit more and looking at these aspects. So who is against Putin? Well, let's see here. Who is against Putin? The oligarchs, for one. Soros is another that's against Putin. And some people say, but Putin's working with the oligarchs. He might be working with some rich people. I mean, I can't state, I'm not right at his side. I'm not working side by side, but Putin is one of those that he is not going to give up his power. Remember, I talked about that in the last video. He's not going to give up his power easily. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he's misusing his power. And we've got to look at all the people who are going against Putin right now are the same ones who went against Trump in January 6th, are the same people who have created these various narratives, who kept promoting the COVID narratives, regardless of the lies. They're the same ones that are censoring the doctors over the COVID narrative. So when you start to look at this, if Putin was really with them, then they wouldn't be taking the approach that they're taking. They have become very, very threatened by him because they don't understand him. Putin has an extreme level of genius IQ on him. There is no doubt that what he has in motion right now, whatever that is, whether you believe that's a good thing or not a good thing, it is well thought out. And he knows exactly what he's doing. There's no way that he would make any kind of a move in this situation without knowing what the consequences are. Now, the media are trying to portray him as being really weak. Oh, Putin's lost his ground. Oh, he's in over his head. Oh, he's in over that. What do we know about the media? The media deflects. So it's not Putin that's in over his head. It might be Zelensky that's in over his head. It might be the oligarchs that are in over their heads in things. They may have underestimated him. Putin did not underestimate them. Remember, Putin has a background of foreign intelligence in the KGB for 16 years, okay? That doesn't mean that he's still supporting all of that 20 years later, because he got out of that 20 years ago, long before he ever took office. Could some of that carry over? Yes, some of that could carry over. And this is why he's such a wild card. He is not controllable by the oligarchs. He is not controllable by Soros. They have tried over and over and over and over again. Now, I do believe, because when you listen to some of the things that Trump, for example, has been saying, when you listen to some of the aspects, you have to listen to things very carefully because the waters are going to get muddy. And if you're not looking at some of these little details and things, you're not going to see the truth in what's going down in these situations. So when you start to look at these pieces and you start to realize that it's very likely Trump knew, and there's indications of that. He said it before he left office. I mean, that things were going to go in this direction. Biden was going to make certain moves. Biden was going to try to push this war because the COVID narrative came down. All of that was collapsing. They had to start a war. They didn't have a lot of other things that they could go to or to do or to rely on. And so Biden starts pushing this war between Ukraine and Putin. And so the more that they came down and tried to start placing Putin in this position, then yes, Putin's going to stand his ground. He's not a back down person. He's just not a back down person. We know that by his codes, which I talked about before. So they are building this whole narrative that it's horrible there. But again, you got to look at who's saying what. And if everybody's against Putin, to me, it's no different than when they were all against Trump. It's just Putin's their scapegoat. And when Trump knew some of this stuff, it's very likely that Trump knew some of this would play out and probably hoping that it would keep a war off of American soil, honestly, in this aspect. So when Putin talks about bringing in the peace troops, they very likely can be peace troops. But the media doesn't want you to believe that. Your mainstream media sources don't want to do that. So now with the COVID narrative, we have the CDC. With the war narrative that we have going on, they're using NATO and the UN for their expert sources on things. So when you start to look at that, we know that NATO is corrupt. Trump pulled out of NATO specifically for various reasons of corrupt. And when you look at the countries that are in NATO, they're all countries that are owned by corruption, including Ukraine. And Ukraine is not on the NATO list, but they want to be in the NATO list. Now, you've got to understand that when you're looking at NATO, how does NATO work? Not just anybody comes in, you have to prove yourself. It's like a membership in a way. And you have to prove your alliance to the corruption. So we have all this variable going on with Ukraine right now. And Zelensky seems to be a little bit of a wild card in there. Really, I think if anybody is a wild card, he's a wild card, because is he still trying to push to get in the UN? If he is, then he's trying to prove himself with this. If he's not pushing to get into the UN and he wants to be free of that, then that's a different ballgame. He's not working with the corruption, so they're going to try to blow him up. We got to understand that there is so much corruption hidden in Ukraine, so much to be exposed there. And you have to say, why would Biden step into this? Well, Biden's going to step into this situation because he has a lot to lose. There's a lot on him, the Obamas, the Clintons, that will all be exposed if things come out of Ukraine. Now, you also want to take a look and say, what is Putin doing? He's targeting very specific areas. The UN wants you to believe that he's targeting residential buildings. The UN wants you to believe that he's harming children and that there's this huge disaster going on over there. And what they're showing you, you've got to keep in mind, the videos are, a lot of them are still staged. There's a lot of the pictures that are being used from 2014, from the battle in 2014. And part of it is you can take a look and see and say, okay, is this real? Well, I went on Real Time today, and I actually went on a site that is earthcam.com, for example, and took a look at what's happening in Kiev. And forgive me if I don't pronounce that right, but I took a look at the webcam, and you've got people just driving down the street, just like normal lives. They're just walking casually across the street. And why did I go to that site? Because one, either your mainstream media sites are down, okay? They're down. Why would they be down? If there's, no contradiction to what they're showing, their live cams should all be up where you could be watching this, honestly. But if you go into the live cam for earthcam.com, then you're going to see people are just going down the street almost normal like. You're not seeing explosions going off all over the place there. So these are very targeted things. Why has Putin said, you got to question these things. Why did Putin come out and say, people need to get out of this area? And he very specifically said the area. If you are a true dictator, if you are a ruler of a country who's going to go in and blow up a country and take it over, you're not concerned about civilians. You're not concerned about anybody getting out. You don't tell people when you're going to do something, you go in and do it. So the very fact that he's actually saying we're going to do something here, we're looking at something here, people need to get out of here. He's targeting very specific areas, very specific people that are there. And those people are people who don't want to be exposed. Those are people that are oligarchs. Those are people who are corrupt that he's going after right now. And he doesn't mind being the big bad guy. You know why? Because that's actually a good thing when you're a world leader like him. You want people to be afraid of you. You want people, Yes, on one hand, you want to be known as generous and kind, but as a world leader, as a world power, like Russia is, China is, and well, the United States was at one point there. You want to know it. He has dirt on all these people. So he is the person they want to frame for a World War III, which, by the way, is not happening. The media wants you to believe that it is not happening. So you have to stop and look at who's saying what. You have to really get down to these details and remember how the media spins things. I mean, even in Biden's State of the Union address yesterday, he comes out and he's saying, we are fighting the oligarchs. He isn't fighting the oligarchs. He's with the oligarchs. He's protecting them. And then you've got these other narratives that are going on where there's like this museum history piece for, let me see if I can find it here on my notes. I know I wrote it down here. Israel's trying to protect one of the oligarchs from sanctions because they have a connection to one of their museums in there, that they're a big donor to it. So they're afraid of allowing this person to be sanctioned. They're afraid of allowing them to be held accountable because they don't want to lose that funding. And this is where I talk about in the codes all the time. You've got to come into integrity. You've got to stand up for what's right. And if you are living in divinity, if you are trusting God, which if they truly were, they would know that their funding would be provided for. They don't have to get it from this oligarch. They should let them be sanctioned, and actually they'd probably get a lot more funding going on in there. So these are the pieces that you have to start and say, this isn't making sense. This isn't making any sense any more than the COVID stuff did. But people need to be able to see through it. So they're going to work to divide us. They're going to try to portray certain people as being horrible and mean and try to divide the people that way and try to get this hate going again. And it's not true. And when you stop and look at these things, I mean, I encourage you, go on something like earthcam.com. So when they start to put a picture up and they say, hey, this is a current picture, this is a current video. And if they're showing snow on the ground and you go to the live cam and there's no snow on the ground, guess what? It's not a real thing. We know how much can be staged. Now, matter of fact, I want to show you an example of how they do some of this staging where they just got caught. This is not the Russia one, but it's a great example anyways in how it works. So let me just jump over to share screen, and you're going to see in this was put up on TikTok, and they were trying to convince people, I'm guessing, it's in one of the Asian countries. I'm sorry, I don't read the language, but that's what it appears like it is to me. And they're trying to portray that there's all these dead bodies there, and there's, just filling up all of these body bags. But you've got to remember, so much of this stuff is staged. It's a movie set, and not always just a plain movie set, but they bring in paid actors to do these things, and then they film and they do their story, and then they go, and then all these actors are, they're paid, they're gone, they go on their way for the thing. But take a look at this. Let me jump over here and get onto this shared screen so that you can see it. Okay. So right here on here, and this is 14 seconds. I want you to keep an eye, and hopefully you can see my, see this person right here, just off to the alleged reporter's shoulder here, this one right here. I've got the picture kind of stopped there for a second, but you see, if you just took a glance at this and you weren't paying attention, or maybe you're just listening and you're not actually watching the news, you're going to think, oh, look, there's all these dead bodies here, right? There's all these body bags aspects here. Well, first of all, you know, if you had true body bags, you wouldn't have shoes on, you wouldn't have shoes sticking out, things like this. And then you've got this guy who's just having a huge issue with the body bag. Okay, he's having a huge issue to the point that they actually have to have somebody step into the scene and help him. Take a quick look at this. See, she's helping him. He can't get it still. His arms are hanging out. They're in the position. Last I knew, dead people don't move around. Last I knew, their arms cannot be up in the air. So you get what I'm saying here? So much of these war scenes, this is a big false flag. They do it with everything. They blow it out of proportion. They make it into something that it isn't. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be careful with Putin. We should. Putin could be a wild card, you know, in some ways. But the reality of it is when we start to look at the pieces, it's matching up. So how else does this match up the way that the COVID narrative went? Well, first you've got the media all over it 24/7. It's like, okay, suddenly all the mandates are dropped. Suddenly everything's okay. Everything can go back to normal. You don't need a vaccine. You don't need this. I mean, you talk about it. Putin literally ended the COVID narrative like flat, boom, just like that. But again, this isn't a new war, and that's what they want you to believe. It's not a new war. Remember, this started in 2014. I talked about that in the other video. So in the COVID narratives, in these cities, in the riots that were going on while Trump was in office, okay, what did they use? Antifa. Antifa was the paid people in a lot of that. Now, what are they using in this narrative, this war narrative? They're using NATO forces. Okay, again, Putin's not in NATO, and it's not because he doesn't want alliances or because he is such a bad guy. And I'm not saying he's perfect, don't get me wrong, but I'm saying that when you look at this, NATO is corrupt, and we know it. NATO is full of corrupt people. So it's NATO forces. It's not necessarily Russian troops that we're seeing. Some of the videos that have been put out there of tanks going in were either like tanks that were just in movement, transitioning, they weren't in battle. And then some of them were tanks that were from 2014. They were movement in 2014. And again, it wasn't war, it was just natural positioning. If you have a country that is threatening to you, you're going to position some forces along the borders. And that's exactly what Putin did. And so again, I encourage you to do your research on this. Now, they talk about all these people fleeing into Poland, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia. Guess what? Those are all UN countries, which is why they're being mentioned. Okay. Oh, look, all these countries are stepping up in their generosity to help the Ukrainian people. I'm all for peace. Yes, there are probably going to be a couple of civilian casualties, but if you had a real war going on, you wouldn't have just 14 people dead. You would have hundreds of people dead, thousands of people dead. Your apartment buildings would be blown up all over the place. That's not happening when you go on to the live cam of things. That is not going on there. Now, think about this as well. You know, they're now trying to position the Putin sympathetics. They call them Putin sympathetics, which are the people that are seeing through the truth of what's happening here. And there's just a few of us right now, but they're going to try to make us into terrorists the same way that they did with anti-vaxxers or anti-maskers and things like that. So as the truth comes out more and more, we're going to see this narrative come up even more because they've got to demonize anybody who's bringing out the truth the same way they did with COVID. Let's silence you, let's shut you down, let's do it. You know, again, if this stuff was all real war, you could go onto any of the live cams with any of the news stations and it would be there. But why are their cameras shut down? Because they don't want you to see that there isn't this massive war going on like they're trying to tell you what's going on. Now, some of the news personalities, whether we're talking Dan Bongino or, uh, you know, other people that have gone into like Fox News channels and things like that, again, we're talking they're associated with mainstream media. Have they had a chance to really personally look into things? I mean, Dan Bongino is just coming up with some stuff that he's getting about the vaccines in there. And he took the vaccine. So, I mean, I like Dan Bongino. I think he puts out a lot of good, you know, information out there. But again, it doesn't matter who it is. You've got to use your own discretion. You've got to use your own reasoning in things. You're going to have to draw on all this information you've been given, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, that has helped you to see the narratives that are going on and draw on that. So really look at that. You know, what I found interesting was one of the first things that they put out was that there were 13 people dead. We talk about that. That was connected to apparently the 95th Airborne Brigade. And I didn't have time to do tons of research into them. But what I did find very interesting is that there were 13 killed in Afghanistan and 13 killed in Ukraine. Okay, that's got Biden's name written all over it. How could it possibly be the same number of people and the same group type of, like a group of them together like that? This is a Biden thing. This is connected to Biden. This isn't connected to Putin. So we have to see through these narratives. We have to listen very carefully. We have to pay attention very carefully to some of these subtleties. When we look at the codes that are connected to this, and I know a lot of people, I'll put this in there, a lot of people are concerned about the vacuum bomb. Why would Putin use that? Putin would use that on the oligarchs. Putin would use that if he thought he could get Soros. Putin would use that under certain conditions. But again, this is why he doesn't really want the civilians hurt, which is why he tells them, get out of this area. Get away from it. When we look at the codes on the date that this alleged invasion started, which it isn't an invasion, by the way. And again, just you got to keep in mind, there's very little you can trust around this right now, but they're going to try to milk it for everything they can. They're going to try to use this. The corrupt is going to try to use this to start World War III. They're going to try to use it to scapegoat all kinds of things. But again, face it, Putin is not stupid. He's got genius level IQs that are way, way up there. And he is a person that he knew exactly what he's getting into. He knows exactly what he's doing in this situation. And he no doubt would be prepared for resources being shut off and all of these things. But it started on February 24th. And during that time, we had a couple of things. And the angel codes that we had going on during that time, this shows that it was really in the angel codes in the book. And if you're wondering when I'm talking about the angel codes or daily codes, that comes out of this book that I put out every year, The Code Journey. Okay. And it's got some great insights, and it kind of cues you in and helps you make sense of some of these world affairs, as well as your personal life and being in your own personal journey. That's a lot of what it's about. But it gives us this heads up so that we can see the truth. And it was on that time we were in the angel codes where things were moving from earthly to divine standards. So again, who was really calling the war? Who was really saying the war was going to go on and the invasion was going on? Well, the only person that's going to put dates out there are the people who are creating the war. We've got a problem reaction solution going on. They've created the problem. They've already got the solution ready to go. And now we're moving into this reaction stage of it all. And so when you look at that, it's shifting. So if the so-called battle actually started that day, then that reaffirms to me that the corruption is what Putin's fighting against, that he is not the aggressor. He's not the attacker in this situation. The only people he's attacking is the deep state corrupt players and the oligarchs. And why would Biden's dead have been? because again, that's his bread and butter. He gets a lot of money from some of these oligarchs in Ukraine. He's profited very well, as has his son, Hunter, has profited very, very well off of these people. And it also shows during that time, the angel coach talked about the likely pressured into a decision. It talks about double life energy being present. And so the corrupt compassionate, oh, look, this war broke out and now we're going to be compassionate for everybody. And that's not true. That's a double image, you know, with that's flipping the story, twisting the truth around. And we know that they do that. And when those are the things that are coming out of Biden's mouth, when those are the things that are coming out of the UN's mouth, we know it's a lie. We know it's that flip opposite in there, because they don't tell the truth to start with in these things. In this aspect, it's very likely that Putin was not really planning on he was hoping he didn't have to do anything. He was ready for it if it went down, but he is hoping he didn't have to do anything. And he's put up the warning numerous times. Are you ready to surrender? That's not Ukraine as a country. Are you ready to surrender? That is, he's talking to those corrupt players. Are you ready to surrender? If not, I'm gonna take another action. And I'm gonna hurt you until you do take action, until you do surrender, until you do give up. They want to pin him because he's got so much information. He's got so much information that will blow their network up. It's ridiculous in there. So that is a big thing. Another question, well, staying with the codes first. So you've got to see how these twists and turns are going on in there. In the daily codes for that day, it says danger and playing both sides of the fence. Now, could that be Zelenko? Because if he started in and he kept saying, you know, again, I haven't had a chance to pull it, and they've kind of pushed him out of the limelight all of a sudden. Well, why would they push him out of the limelight? Are they trying to protect him? Are they trying to, you know, realize he's not as strong as he needs to be? What's the deal there? You have to start asking these questions in there. And, you know, that could put him, yes, in a position of danger. But is it really Putin that he's afraid of, or is it the oligarchs? If he's trying to get into NATO and he's trying to prove himself, I think it's, you know, here again, the media spin. They want you to believe that Putin was in over his head. It's not Putin that's in over his head. It's probably Zelenko that's in over his head. It's the deep state that's in over their head. In this situation, they underestimated Putin instead of Putin and underestimating them. Putin knows far well, let's face it, he was in the KGB for a while. He was you know, he did the foreign intelligence work in there. So he knows darn well how all of their heads think. This is not new to him. He's not in over his head by a long shot here, okay? Trust was on the platform. Who could you trust? Who could you not trust? So it's very likely that the corruption, the Soros network, the UN, NATO, pushed Putin to a point that he had to take an action. And in doing that, that leads them to be able to say, see, he started a war. Well, he never really did, because again, this is an ongoing war that started by Soros in Ukraine in 2014. So we got to come back to that. Arrogance knocks off of the pedestal is another piece on those codes for that day. It brings up there's no right or wrong, just different paths. So yeah, one path takes you down the new world order, and some of the newscasters flubbed up on that and put that out there. And then other paths are about freedom from some of these corrupt players. And so, you know, is one right or wrong? I mean, we all have our opinions on that, but you have to make those decisions for yourself. So some of these people are getting, you know, could they get knocked off their pedestals? Yeah, these deep state players, the corrupt players, the oligarchs, UN, NATO, they've got a pretty high arrogance level. So there's a good chance that when, you know, Putin, if he's got a strike, he's going to make it count, because he realizes he's not going to get multiple chances at that. you got to come back to that they're trying to compare the explosions. They're trying to make you think the explosions that are happening there are exactly the same as the 9/11, which means now they want to pin the 9/11 narrative on them. And we know that was an inside job as well. So here again, you've got all these multiple layers. I want you to be awake. I want you to be aware. I want you to listen to the subtleties. I want you to bring all of those lessons of media spins, of all of these things back around. Now, one more piece that comes out is Sean Penn is filming conveniently a film about Russian invasion. So how much are what we're seeing actually actors? We don't know. We're not there. But when you go in, and let me see if I can pull it up. I don't have it live anymore. But when you go in, like I said, go on to earthcam.com and look it up, and you'll see for yourself what it actually looks like there. And you can see the live cams that are going on. Take a look. Don't be caught off guard. Don't buy these narratives. We are going down the same path. The media is trying to create the same platform in a different scenario, the same plan in a different scenario that they did with COVID, and we need to not fall for it. So with that, I'm going to get off. Take care, everybody. I hope, you have an amazing weekend coming up. Don't play into the narratives. Don't get into the battles on this. Stand in your ground, watch it, look for those subtleties, and you'll be able to unfold the truth. And this is so important because it's going to get muddier and more confusing. And I want you to be able to see through the truth. And even those people that you trust that have been very good about calling the truth might miss it on some of the things that are going to be coming up later this month. Take care.